Pain of Salvation are a Swedish prog metal band led by multi-instrumentalist Daniel Gildenlow. In 1984, at the age of 11, he formed the band Reality. This band grew over time and were renamed Pain of Salvation in 1991, which is a name that he thought of during a maths class. In 1997, they released their first album and they released their 11th in 2020. They've had lots of member changes over the years. Hi, my name's Dan, and this is a review of the album Remedy Lane by Pain of Salvation, which was released in 2001. It was their fourth album. So, on this channel, most of it's all mini album reviews. And most of them are from the list of the 3,000 greatest albums of all time, according to a website called Acclaim Music, where they've made an amalgamated list from lots of critic lists. It's a great list, and I'm nearly two-fifths of the way through that list. Occasionally, though, I step off that list. One of the reasons to do that is to review an album that I like personally, and there are several categories of those. This one is one that I'm categorizing as a hidden gem because I don't think it's going to be particularly well known by people unless you happen to be in the prog world or maybe the metal world, the prog metal world. So it's an album that I came across several years ago. Like a lot of prog metal, it's not by any means all metal, and mostly it's kind of more rock. It's even kind of as light and potentially folky at times, but other times it's kind of full on metal, uh, big sound, big distorted guitars, quite heavy attitude. And then there's some folky tune instruments, yes, at times going on. There's lots of switching of textures. There's long evolving and changing tracks. This is all kind of par for the course for prog and for prog metal. The musicality is excellent. There's some nice grooves and moments. There's especially good at building feel from section to section. So there's one track which is Undertow, which is particularly good at the kind of build that it does through the length of the track. Um, Quite technical at times, in fact, very technical at some points. But they seem to manage that without losing the idea of having a feel and having a heart to what they're doing, which is quite a trick to do. Sometimes prog gets a bit kind of, well, it's like math rock. It has this feeling of clinical ness to it. They're so focused on getting it tight and getting it correct that they lose sometimes the idea of it being emotive, whereas this is quite emotive. There is, I think, one of the beginnings to one of the tracks here, which is Rope Ends, which I have thought was, well, it probably still is, turns one of the hardest time signatures I've ever tried to work out. And so I get this temptation when I listen to stuff like this and go, oh, this isn't in a straight time signature. I'll try and work it out. And I start counting. I'll try and work out. There is a whole track in here that is in 7/8, which is something that I tend to enjoy. This is the start of Rope Ends, and years ago, I think I categorized it in my head uh, um, as eight and a bit or four and a bit or something like that. It just has this weird kind of off bit in the second half, almost like they've played half the bar at one speed and then slowed down slightly for the next half. Very, very technical, very difficult. I've looked it up. Turns out it's in 4/4, which is really bizarre. And I think it just about works if I'm counting along to it, but it's so hard to count to because it pulls you out of speed. Anyway, respect for something that's so difficult, and I presume they played it live and nailed it. Um, so musically, in some ways, I would say, so I'm going to reference Muse here, and I'm going to say that if you're a Muse fan, you might actually really like this if you haven't come across them before. It's got that kind of flowing, buildy feeling often to it. I'm also going to mention Dream Theater, who are prog metal, and there are some similarities. And also Arion, uh, lesser known guy, Dutch guy, who's done some really interesting albums. As well as being amazing musicians, Daniel Gildenlow, who's the central character here, is quite the versatile singer. So he can do high wails and he can do kind of breathly closeness. He can do low growls and almost sort of verging into the growly stuff of metal. And then there's some nice vocal harmonies and it's quite expressive. So, yeah, good there. There's also some really nice, interesting guitar-y bits that he uses as riffs, often kind of quite percussive. And they sound like there's one bit that sounds like he's palm muting and then pulling the pickup. It's kind of very, kind of almost like a washboard sound to it. So there's some unusual bits of music in there. Um, Songs here about love, life, relationships, sex, lust, loss, self-understanding, and religious searching. Apparently, semi-autobiographical. Apparently. So Gildenlow has said that it relates to a period in time when he was searching for an understanding of freedom. I didn't hugely pick up on those themes and the words. I found myself more focused on the music. Despite that, I would say it does feel like a thematic or a concept album. Just musically, it seems to tie together in that sort of way. So I discovered a lot of prog from this kind of era. Where are we? 2001. Um, Having thought for several years that prog kind of died out in the early 80s, it didn't. Excuse me, it kind of went underground. And then there's been this third wave of prog. And Pain of Salvation have stuck out to me as being a great band with a little bit of an edge over some of the others. There's a lot of great music. A lot of it kind of feels similar in some ways. And this isn't very dissimilar, but I think it's just got a little bit of an edge in terms of the feel of it over some of the other bands that I've come across. So I like this. I like this quite a lot, which is obviously why I want to bring it to your attention. I'd love to know what you think of this album if you know it, and if you don't know it and it sounds interesting, please do have a listen and then let me know what you think. The way to communicate with me is by leaving me comments in the comments box, but that's it from me for now.